George, I am so excited to be up here with you. I don't know that if everyone knows that this journey for us began over 2.5 years ago, and when I visited you at your studio in Boulder, and you kind of presented to me a couple of boxes. And I had no idea what to expect when I arrived at your studio and when we started talking. And I remember I made 2 phone calls on the drive home from Boulder. The first was to my husband, and I just said, I can't process what I just witnessed. I just saw so many incredible photographs. I didn't know that they existed. I can't believe that I had the privilege to view them and possibly work with them. And then, of course, the second call was to our then director, Adam Lerner, and said, we have to come back to Boulder together because you have to see this. And so it is just so joyful for me to be able to be up here with you. Thank you for coming out from Pittsburgh to be here tonight and for the rest of the weekend. We're really kind of making you work for it, but we appreciate it.
Thanks. Nora, when Nora came to visit me the first time, I was very reluctant to do anything with this box. I had kept it closed for all these years, and I was in an old abandoned hospital, and I had
Sounds kind of creepy.
It was kind of creepy, and I had the pediatric rehab wing, and all the windows looked out at the mountains, and there were all these bugs that we try and kill before someone like Nora would come in, and we'd open up the pictures and everything. But for me, well, I was so happy to share it with you, and your enthusiasm was so great. I was much more reluctant. I was like, do I really want to open this up?
Well, and so let's take a step back for a second. Can you share with everyone how you kind of came to collect all and to accumulate all the material that is on view? Because every single thing that we have upstairs in the galleries is from your collection. Can you tell us how that came to be?
Well, as a photographer, you're a collector. And I would collect both, when I was at RISD especially, I would collect both audio. I had a cassette recorder going all the time and collected every conversation, every class I went to, everything. And then I would take pictures, and I would also just collect stuff. When someone sent me a card, when someone slipped me something, I had these files that were my friend files.
But you were like 19 years old. How did you even know what a file? I mean, it just feels like you're preternaturally kind of organized.
Well, I wasn't that organized, but for that I was. And I realized that lots of people, for instance, through the years sent me thank you notes. And every year I would start a new folder of thank you notes. It's really artifacts and evidence that we were here. And I always go back to Dwayne Michaels' picture. This photograph is my proof. And it's a picture of a couple on a bed. And it's not such an amazing picture, but what he wrote is amazing. And it's really, for me, the definition of photography, which is there was that moment, we were together, we were in love, look, see for yourself. And you know, whenever I've been, when I was with Francessca, when I was with my other friends at RISD, when I was in class, all these moments felt really special, and I wanted to hold on to them.
And did you feel like you recognized how kind of precious they were in the moment? I mean, that again is like a kind of self-awareness that eludes most teenage and young
But I'm
adults.
sitting here, and I feel this moment is really precious.
I agree.
I mean, Mark is here, and Alex and Paula are here, and like all these people, and you're here, and we've become, I mean, one of the things that's so interesting about this is I really was not so anxious to go through this process, because I knew it was going to be a process that was going to be emotional and hard, and I didn't sometimes know why I wanted to do it. And Nora was just incredibly understanding and nice, and I hate to say this, but not that curatorial in her relationship with me, which I needed. I needed a little comfort around the whole thing that she gave me, and that's why it's here.
So just to kind of close the circle, how the material that wound up in a box for you,
Yeah.
because you clearly were very organized and kept lots of boxes filled with memories and special moments. How with Francessca in particular, did she have her own box, if you will?
Well, I had a lot of Francessca stuff. I mean, I had these prints that she had sent through the mail. I had pictures we had taken together. I had the the little invitations to tea parties and things, and I would just put them, I would just keep them. But I kept them with other classmates too. Francesca wound up being, very well known in this incredible body of work. We knew that she was really special at RISD, but you didn't understand then. What you really didn't understand is what any of us were going to become.
So you've kind of touched on it a little bit, but what were your reservations about sharing this material kind of until now? Like how did you decide that now was the time that you could share it publicly and be open to what kind of might happen as a result of that?
Part of it's my own kind of development as a person or an artist or whatever. Like I've come to a place that I was afraid of a lot of things for a long time, that I kind of got over my fear. Even the night before the opening, I met with a friend from, this is so crazy that this was happening like a month ago, but I met with a friend of mine from Boulder, a relatively new friend who's a life coach. And she went back to the crits at RISD with me. We were sitting outside Union Station, and we had this 3-hour dinner, and she said, why, when you were at your crits at RISD, why couldn't you understand the praise, and why, when you were doing all this work, did you never embrace your work and do a collection or anything else? And it was the same with the Francessca thing. I just couldn't personally deal with this. And
the attention or the questioning of it?
It was, it's really a question of, is it good enough?
Is the work good enough?
Is the work good enough? I felt what was special about this work was not so much the work as the story. Mm-hmm. And the story was that in the time that I knew Francesca, and the experience that I had with her was very different from what had been out in the world. Like after she died, her parents took her work to Marian Goodman, and her mother worked with Marian Goodman, and they created this legacy and went out in the world, and it was written about by mostly people that didn't know Francesca, but were art historians and art scholars, and they created this legacy, and it became very, very popular and touched a lot of people, and we wouldn't be here unless they had done such a good job with what they did. But my little chapter was different. Everything that had gone out, it felt like it was under the cloud of how she died. And my chapter and my experience with Francesca was with how she lived. And this experience that I had was not the whole biography. It was just this chapter. No one had ever seen a picture of her smiling. And that's what I think is so radical upstairs, is that we show her with her mom like any other mother and mom going around Chinatown, and kind of bring it back down to earth a little bit.
So in that vein, can you just kind of maybe bring to life for the rest of us what it was like, since you've described so much about the sense of humor and the personality and the joyfulness and the silliness and youthfulness, which was more the actual context in which you guys knew each other. Can you just kind of get into that a little bit more deeply in terms of, how did you first connect with her, and what was it like to walk into her studio, and what were the things that you guys talked about?
Well, I don't think we talked about photography that much, even though we were both in the same photo class. There was one person that, for the essay of why you want to go to RISD, she wrote, asking me why I want to go to RISD is like asking a clown why they want to join the circus. And that's all she wrote for her essay.
Not Francesca.
Not Francesca.
Another friend.
But someone that Francesca photographed. And she got in. And we were all there, like if you didn't belong there, even if you got in, you didn't last very long. It was just a place that people that needed to be there and needed that community were. And so when I met Francesca, she was obviously, when she put her work up the first day, it was like 5 naked pictures of herself, and they were just completely different than what anyone else was doing. People were doing billboards, like like 18 different views of some billboard on the top of a building in Providence, or they were doing, I don't even know. I was doing my slideshows where I was recording people a lot and then editing the recordings into conversations that you would never have. I would record separate people and edit it into, but so we were all doing our thing, but Francesca's was obviously really special. Everyone wanted to be an artist. That's not including me. I was not actually into that so much, but Francesca was an artist. So there was a little bit of jealousy and there was a little bit of awe. And there was also a little bit of, she was so deep into it that she was a person that you really wanted to be with. And she was also someone that was hard to be friends with.
So, but can you get back to, again, just when you were spending time with her,
right.
Just because, you have this great touchstone really of having, been close with her and had a friendship with her. And I think there is just an endless amount of curiosity about what she was like as a person. And given that the point of view of this exhibition was really to humanize her, could you share a little bit more about those human aspects?
I wish I could. My thing is when I feel like that our experiences were very much in the moment. There, she was taking pictures. I was there, so I started taking pictures of her taking pictures.
And was that a common thing that people at RISD were doing at that moment?
Well, we weren't. I don't think that we were overthinking too much. We were probably overthinking everything. But we also weren't like, for me, taking pictures, that's what I've done every day of my life, and that's what Francesca did every day.
Right.
So
it was
for
like
us
breathing.
Taking pictures was not like, oh wow, like I'm photographing Francesca, or Francesca's taking these pictures. It was just my memories, and what this show represents to me is really fun. Like when I was hanging out with Francesca, for the most part, it was fun. Like she was taking her pictures, and it was fun to watch. It wasn't like I was trying to, now we're trying to dissect it, and what's that dress? Was that a prop, or what's that picture, and all that stuff. And when we were there, it was just, that was Francesca's loft, and it was a fun place to be. There
was one point at some point, we've had many conversations about this work and material over the last couple of years, but you talked to me once about what it was like to walk into her loft, because it was like walking into one of her photographs.
Right.
And to me, that conjures kind of a sense of a stage set or a stage, like a sense of theater, meaning that what you're seeing in the photographs is staged, right? Is composed, is that she had some setup and that she had some idea that was maybe she was working out. Is that accurate, would you say?
Totally, absolutely. It was like a theater or a stage set. It would change all the time. Suddenly there would be an aquarium there would be something different over the window, or there would be things lying around or hanging around, or I don't know. But I mean, the thing that was interesting also about it is there were no comfort, normal comfort things. Like she didn't have a kitchen. She barely had a bathroom. She didn't have a place to bathe or shower. She had a hot plate, and it was all in. And I would suggest that if you created a space to create it that had no other use, and you didn't have to worry about what the landlord would think of the walls, and you didn't have to worry about what you tacked up, and you didn't have to worry if you painted something or anything, that's the space that she created for herself to work in. And that's a very obvious thing, and it's a really powerful thing, and I don't know why it's super hard to do.
Well, I think what's also remarkable is that she was doing this at such a young age, right? She was 18, 19 years old, and that she already had the conviction and confidence to create this space and to occupy it in the ways that she did. I don't know if it manifests as confidence at the time.
I'm not sure. I think it might be easier at a younger age because you have no kids that you have to feed with a stove or refrigerator, and you have no responsibility to anyone but yourself. And what's kind of crazy is how many people went to that school, including myself, that thought they needed a full kitchen, that thought they needed, all these creature comforts. That I had a fireplace in my apartment, and I had nice sheets. I really like nice sheets. And it's like, what does that have to do with making art?
Well, there is something, I think for a lot of artists, certainly several artists whom I've worked with,
That's
there
a
can
kitchen.
be, I don't know, I lived in New York. Mine wasn't much bigger than that. I do think, though, that this kind of complete integration of, the work that you're making and the life that you're living really does happen for so many artists, where it's really hard to separate kind of practical real life things, needs, necessities, concerns from, a project that you're, basically living in and working on at the same time.
Well, the project that Francesca was working in and living in was Francesca. And she was like, when I think of going to that loft, I just think of the texture of everything, which you've blown up in the room upstairs. But the texture of everything felt like Francesca. The walls felt like Francesca. The floor felt like Francesca. All the dresses looked like Francesca. I mean,
did you work with her, or were you around her when she was making work in other spaces, whether it was outside or in another building? Because I know she certainly made things in other places. A majority of the work that she's well known for certainly was in that loft. But were you with her when she was doing stuff in other places?
well, she came to my space and did pictures.
Oh, really?
And then over at Benson Hall, which was the photo building where we had our crits, she did work there. And then she was in the nature lab, where I wasn't, but I know.
Can you talk about what that was?
The nature lab?
Mm-hmm.
Well, it was mostly for drawing, but it's where you'd go, and they had that's not a good smile. But the reason that the towel's on our head is she would come over and go in the bathroom for like an hour, taking the shower till all the hot water was gone, and you just see steam coming out under the door. And then Francesca would come with her hair all wrapped up, and she was hungry, and we'd make tuna sandwiches, or in this case, I think we made oatmeal.
But back
That's
to
a
the
better
nature.
smile.
Back to the nature lab.
Oh, the nature lab had a lot of taxidermy, and it had a lot of things for people to draw. And Francesca went in there, and she used a lot of that material. She was the only one I know that photographed in the nature lab.
And there are a couple of photographs upstairs that were definitely made there.
Right, and then Charlie the model, who we would go to class and draw, and he was a weird guy. And Francesca, had him.
For those who might not know, there is a series of about, I think, 8 photographs that Francesca made with this one nude male, and the series is called Charlie the Model. And it's, in part, it's well known because it's pretty much the only body of work that she made with a nude male figure.
That you've seen.
That we've seen, yes. I know. Fair point,
Right.
fair point. When you guys were in school, was it hard to imagine kind of life as a professional artist, or being in the real world post-college as an artist, as a photographer in particular?
It was, we all had fantasies about it, but at RISD, they were not into talking about any of that. Like, you left RISD, you had no accounting class, you had no practical class in anything. We basically went there and we took pictures, and we took pictures, and we took a drawing class. We might take a design class or an art history class, but mostly we were there and had the freedom just to do pictures. And then you'd go to these classes and talk about your work ad nauseum. You'd listen to all these people talking about pictures that generally weren't very good, but they could talk forever about them. And then you would
I think anyone who's been to art school recently feels like it probably hasn't changed very much.
And then you would get to Francesca's work and not very much was said. I think there was a lot of jealousy. The teachers, I'm not sure exactly what was going on, but I think there was some weirdness with some of the teachers in Francesca, and the work was just so good. It was so good, and you knew it then. But no one thought, oh, Francesca's going to be the famous artist, or Francesca's going to be you just never would think like that.
So when you would talk about life after RISD, what was the idea, or what were people?
I'm making this up a little because I don't totally remember, but the way I would make it up would be that Francesca probably thought about that more than anyone else. I mean, that's my feeling with her, because she was kind of born to be an artist. I mean, her mom, creating objects of art was her mom's whole life.
And fathers.
And fathers too, that's right. But I think that, like, when you're a parent, you can't say you're going to be an artist, you're going to be a baseball player, you're going to be a curator, but...
Well, I think that maybe in previous generations, there was probably some of that. But it seems, from what I understand, that Betty Woodman and George Woodman, her parents, believed that being an artist was like the highest calling,
Absolutely,
right?
Absolutely. In fact, 2 weeks before Betty died, I went to see her, not knowing that she was going full court. She'd been sick the summer before, but this was in December 2 years ago, and she had so many projects going, they couldn't even remember them all practically with Katerina. And I went there to get her blessing for this show. And we talked about a lot of things, and then she said, well, tell me about your work. And I said, well, I really wasn't brought up like Francesca. I never was taught how to create objects of art. I did my work, I get great pleasure, I've done this whole thing, but I never knew how to make the picture that goes on the wall. And Betty's brow just furrowed, and she was very dismissive. She was almost like, well, I have no more time for you. And this is after 2 hours of talking, It was really, she was all in. Making art was the highest calling.
Well, and it seems like Francesca was clearly all in, and making
absolutely
art was...
But whether she... whether she became an artist like a museum artist, or whether she became a fashion photographer, or whether she became a zillion things in between, I think she had this fantasy a little bit more maybe towards the end of being a fashion photographer and revere Deborah Turbeville, for instance, rather than necessarily imagining herself at MoMA or whatever.
Right.
But it's, I think that when you're in the middle of art school, that everything in the real world is kind of on the other side of the river, and you haven't gotten on the bridge yet. You're just here, and you're doing this whole thing, and you see it over there, and you think, fantasize about what it might be like. This is a shot in my studio that Francesca took.
I should have had you sit here, because you're totally getting distracted by the images.
Well, I want to know who that hairy guy is in the dress.
I'm sure.
And the tennis shoes and the striped socks.
I mean, I think that there's something about being in a bubble when anyone is kind of that age and is surrounded by peers who are enormously generative and creative, and you can't kind of imagine life afterwards. But in that transition, did everyone who left RISD when you did and when Francesca did plan intent, was there any other path than being an artist or working in,
Well, I think also that there was the reality that you probably couldn't support yourself as an artist, so you might have to do something else. And what would that thing be? And I don't remember ever talking about that. I don't remember anyone saying, well, I'm going to work at a restaurant so I can do my art or, whatever. But you're always in a bubble when you create. You have to be in a bubble when you create.
Really? You don't think that you're taking and absorbing and reflecting on things that are coming at you from all different sources?
I think, yes, but in order to have the focus of creating a piece of work, you have to be way deep. The trick is to be really deep into yourself and taking things in at the same time, or you spend a period of time taking things in and then process them by yourself. But I think that, and I'm a very social person, but the act of
we can tell.
of creating work is very lonely and very singular and very
So in light of that, the photographs that you have of Francesca in the studio kind of setting something up and getting into a mirror or an object and kind of figuring out what she's going to do. Did you feel voyeuristic when you were there?
Totally.
You did?
Oh, yeah.
So can you talk a little bit about that?
I mean, photographers are or
Fair point.
that's what we do. And the trick with being a voyeur is that your subject trusts you enough to let you observe.
Mm-hmm.
And your deal as a photographer is to be trustworthy, I think, or as a person. So I think a lot of what we do is based on trust. Like all these women went and took off their clothes for Francesca and put Francesca's face on their body, literally, and that took a lot of trust and a lot of. I mean, that's even in college, that's a really hard thing to do, to get people like in a place where they are. I mean, we would use each other as models because that's all you had. But even so, like to be a part of someone else's vision, really. Like those pictures that Francesca took tell you nothing, I think, about the subjects. They only really tell you about Francesca.
Are you talking about they tell you about Francesca when even though she's depicted in them, or when she's not?
Well, like the picture of the three, I think this is one of the most amazing pictures too. The pictures of the three naked women holding Francesca's.
One of them is Francesca.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And
right.
then it's Sloane and I think Liza,
right.
her other two friends.
Right.
And there's a print that is closely related. It's either kind of before or after shot that we have upstairs.
It's just Francesca by herself.
No. It's two of them. I think Francesca's pulled it down from her face. But can you dig a little bit into why you think that says more about Francesca than them?
Because I don't think when you look at that picture, you have any interest in knowing who those other women are. And it's really like you're looking at Francesca's ego and her vanity and her exploration of just the whole idea of a headshot, I think. And here are these other women's bodies and obviously like souls, and you don't care at all about them.
Well, it gets back to the idea we were talking about earlier of performance and being in a stage or a theater. And essentially you have these two friends of hers performing to be Francesca.
Yes, but
But she's also pretending to be herself, or performing as herself.
They're acting in her play.
Yes. So to what extent was that like, I don't know, did you recognize that at the time, or were you all aware of it? Or is it something that you can acknowledge in retrospect that that's what was unfolding?
I think I knew it at the time because I was very clear that I couldn't do that. Like she was doing something that I knew I was incapable of doing.
Do you think others felt that as well, and that's why it was there was the kind of tension or friction around discussing her work publicly in a crit or something because everyone knew? I mean, I'm pop psychologizing the whole thing, so I'm just curious though if others kind of reacted similarly.
I don't totally know. But I do think that for some reason when I've been doing this project, I've been thinking about work in class that I didn't like, that people were doing, and they were printing it archivally and making these perfect prints where Francesca's were all fixer stained and messy. And they were, extremely articulate about what they were trying to do and lots of stuff, and it was completely uninteresting. And I remember sitting through hours and hours of that kind of a thing, and it just turned me off so much because it was, again, going back to Dwayne Michaels, he would rather see a really bad print of a great idea than a perfect
print of a bad idea.
Yeah.
Well,
thanks for
that's okay. I got yeah. I'm picking up what you're throwing down.
But that's the thing. Like Francesca's work was so imperfect in the most perfect way.
And that's actually one of the reasons why you will all notice in the exhibition we framed the works to the print rather than to the image. A lot of her work has been presented to the world with a big mat around the print and just features the image. And I, in conversation with you, really felt so strongly about showing it for what it was. Part of the effort of this exhibition is to, in that way that we want to kind of humanize her, is to also show that she was an extremely brilliant image maker, but maybe a not so great technician. And that's so valuable to know, because it helps us appreciate what she did all the more, because we see that you see the kind of work or the effort a little bit more clearly. And I think that even some things that we have also, like the contact sheets, which show us some of the images or the prints that we have in frames, but it shows the kind of before, after, or sometime around that as well. And it gives us this glimpse into a process, which is so rare. And for someone like Francessca Woodman, whose reputation is kind of at this mythic level, it's almost as though her feet never touched the ground, because she died so young, because she produced such strong work at such a young age, that, I feel like our responsibility with this exhibition, as we wanted to kind of bring it back to life almost, was to show it in all of its full glory, which included some flaws.
A lot of flaws.
Yeah.
I'm going to just step back here for a second, because what's so radical about this show for me, and the reason that it's here and the reason I think it came out so remarkably, is that the spirit of that box, the reason I kept these things, the reason I put them in this box, the reason I appreciated them at the moment and wanted to hold on to them, was that it captured this feeling that we had when we were at school. And one of my most joyous moments at the opening was hearing people talk about what they felt like when they were in school. They were going back to that place and what they were doing and how they were creating and everything. And I just love that. And it's such a, we're so busy, and we're spending all this time swiping through images, and we're spending all this time trying to love and trying to understand and trying to pay our mortgages, our rent, or whatever we're doing. And when we were in school and when we were having this moment, here was this person that was fearless. She was fearless. And it was so powerful to be around. And it was so powerful to see, you'd be walking and see that last image, taped to a phone pole. And it was an original Francessca print. And it was her naked, or this picture, you would see these images. And these are someone who is not afraid to go to that place in themselves. And I hope, and I'm totally making a leap here, but I would guess for Francessca that when you look at this work, it was this is a place that I went, and this is a place that I want to share that depth and that feeling with you. And for me, this little box of work and this show upstairs, had that spirit. And the miracle to me is that we, Nora, appreciated the spirit of the way the work was created and translated it to this space. And one of the things I feared so much and why I didn't want to share the work is that I had this picture of giving it to a museum, and it's oh, now we have some Francessca pictures to show, and we're going to use it for the Francessca pictures, not really the story. And there was this story, and I was very clear with you that was important to me. There was a moment, I remember leaving Betty's earlier, but not the last time, and coming out and calling you and really being in tears because I felt like I didn't have control over the work anymore and the story. And I called my wife and I said, I don't know if I can do this. I can't control this. And she said, you have to make a decision. You either are going to control it and it's going to stay in your, attic forever, or you're going to trust Nora is going to, create something in the spirit that hopefully Francessca created the work, and I was able to keep my little box, and then we're able to share it with everyone here. And it's a powerful experience being able to do that. And I also think that it's what artists do. Like, artists create this work with different levels of ability and different levels of inspiration and at different times. And to be able to appreciate what a great artist has done and to share that is a gift.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more around the gift part, especially. Can you,
By the way, just not to stop, but this picture is Francessca went to where we did our crits, and she pinned herself up there because that's how she felt, was the way we were all, I hope not me, but maybe me, were treating her work up on the wall in class.
It's so funny because Hasti tonight was like, how do you want the slideshow to run? And I said, oh, don't worry, we're not going to talk about any individual photographs. What do I know? So a couple of totally unrelated questions, but that pick up on what you just said. One is that, we've had a lot of photo classes and art history classes at the high school and college level especially come through. And recently there was a class that came through and they were really frustrated that we didn't foreground that how Francessca had died and the manner in which she died, which was by suicide for those who don't know, and that part of her story wasn't included. Now, you and I know why we didn't foreground that, because we really wanted this to be a kind of celebration of a body of work that was produced in this moment in time. But how would you respond to that kind of response?
My mother died a year ago, and if we would sit here and talk about my mother and talk about how she died, she would be really pissed off. I mean, that's basically how I feel. I mean, I'm not interested in how people die as much as how they live. That's for starters. The second thing is, I was not around Francessca when she died, and I don't want to begin to, the whole idea with this show was that it was my experience with her were real experiences that we had together. It was not like me imagining what she was thinking. It's not me imagining what her loft looked like. This is what it looked like. It's not imagining what a relationship when her mom and her went out and got dim sum. This is what it's not imagining even what it was like playing with another photographer at RISD. This is it. This really happened. Look, see for yourself. Mm-hmm. And also, if you want to read about her suicide, there's tons written. And there's movies, and there's all kinds of stuff. It's like that part of the narrative has been written and talked about endlessly. And for me, the cloud that produced is distasteful, personally. And I remember when she died, going to the memorial service at her parents'. And I was just, we were all extremely upset, but I was also, I don't even know how to.
It seems that there's no denying how she died. I think your point is, let's look at this work in the moment that it was made and in that context, which hasn't really been explored, and let's see what happens as a result of that.
That's right.
Okay, I want to switch gears for a moment, and I want to ask if she ever talked about or referenced, or if it was kind of at all part of her psyche that she was from Colorado, that she grew up in Boulder. There are some people here tonight who knew her and her family from when they were in Boulder. Was that did that inform, or did she speak to any of that experience, would you say?
She would come back here for sometimes in the summer, mm-hmm. and I got letters from her that were postmarked in Boulder.
Did you ever visit her over the summer out here?
No, but my brother did, and that was another something happened. I don't know what, but Francessca wasn't happy, and my brother claimed nothing did, so who knows? But that's in one of the letters up there.
Yes. Okay, and then this is also kind of moving into a different topic. The kind of status of the photographic object, the photograph in the late 70s and early 80s when she was making this work. And if you could talk a little bit to kind of, I don't know, initiate that conversation around how photography at RISD, which is obviously an art school, it's not exclusively a photography school. How was the photography department? How were the photo students? Were they discreetly, were you separate from the other students or those who were working in sculpture or painting or something, or was it all kind of integrated? I'm trying to get at what the context for photography was.
Well, each discipline had its own building or area. So you could go 4 years and never see the sculpture, see architecture, some things. But, we were all living together and kind of together. Benson Hall, which was the photo building, was a mess. It was just a mess. Like, it was overpainted and it was just, honestly, if you got a clean print out of those dark rooms, it was a miracle because it was just messy and kind of, it wasn't about creating the perfect object. It was about kind of, I think, although there were people that were, creating perfect objects. And then there was a teacher there named Paul Crott, and he was the chemical guy, and he had this chemical company in Pawtucket, which is nearby, and Paul was like this madman. His hair was always a different color, and he would drink the chemicals too. Like, it was really weird. And he would put vanilla in the stop bath, which smelled bad just because he liked the smell better than straight stop bath. But he was like a really weird guy, but he would, like, all the chemicals were made in his little company. And the prints, and then there was a guy named that sold archival boxes, that made archival boxes. So we were taught like how to make archival prints, but it was just kind of a joke. I don't even believe in making anything archival when you're in college because it's like giving it an importance that it doesn't have. Although look, now it's kind of, things have faded and, that's a little crazy, but I just can't describe to you what a mess the place was. Like the washers and the trays of chemicals, and there was no, nothing.
That speaks to a kind of lack of value maybe to it, or?
Totally.
Okay.
Totally.
Well, you look at the photographs that you have of her loft and the one that we used to blow up to create the installation in that gallery. I mean, she left her stuff a mess as well. I mean, was that the...
But now that I think about it, I don't know that she was so involved in the process of creating the pictures, and then once the pictures were made, we were all kind of moving on. I mean, we would have this final show at Woods Gary, a senior show, and we'd do some kind of collection of our work or a specific project or something. But I think that room upstairs very well represents how we thought of, and how I would argue you should think about work when you're a student. Like, you shouldn't be thinking about it as like these directors.
Yeah, but you were gathering it and organizing it in folders.
I was gathering it, but I wasn't framing it like the frames that we got from the New York Art Gallery that was going to sell some of these, and they matted them and made them look like these perfect pictures, and they aren't. I mean, I appreciated them for the spirit, but I never thought of them as like that they'd be in a museum.
You appreciated them for the spirit, and it sounds like she appreciated it for the process, or okay.
And she was. I mean, you talk about this in your essay where she was building on sequences, where she would do things sequentially and then maybe take one of those ideas and keep going, or however it worked. But at Yale now, there are all these directors that are in school that are having shows on Broadway, Jeremy O'Harris. And not anything against him, and he's brilliant, but when you're in school, that's the time that you kind of, or especially when we were in school, that you don't have to deal with commercial considerations. And as soon as money enters it, and commerce, and reputation, and all that, it just becomes a completely different thing, as we all know. And even if we are a photographer, and we're doing our Instagram feed now, oh, well, what will the people that are hiring us think? Or what will this person think? Or what will that person think? And it's like, that's really destructive. And I feel like when she was doing these, she was there not thinking about what her teacher would think or what a curator would think. She was doing her work.
She cared about what she cared about her own kind of approval rather than others.
Right, but because of the way she was brought up, she was aware of where great art and great artists fit in the world.
Mm-hmm. I think at this moment it might be a nice opportunity to get questions from the audience. Is that good for you?
That's you guys.
Okay. All right. Sarah, do we have a...
We do not.
Okay. Stand up and shout. Okay, all right.
It seems like she was doing a lot of stuff that was very much showing something truthful and vulnerable. Did the other students start to try to do some of that?
At school, no, but since school, and especially
gosh.
since she's died, like, there's so many crazy stories of people trying to do this work and find that place inside of them. That part of it I'm kind of fine with, and I think that lots of people copied Avedon or copied Irving Penn or copied, lots of artists to kind of find their way, and then hopefully they find their own rhythm and find their own style. But at school, there was no one doing this.
Other questions? Mark.
Did you see an obsessive, compulsive nature of her? I heard a story after her death, and they thought they had found all the work, and then they opened up a closet in Florence, and out came another 10,000 prints that no one had ever seen before. Did you see that compulsive?
Well, we were all working pretty compulsively, so it didn't seem that unusual. We all had thousands of prints by the time we graduated that we had maybe kept or thrown away or done something with. But I was, I was shooting 1,000 images a week easily.
But it's an important thing to acknowledge that you were shooting 1,000 print shots, but like that wasn't digital. That was film.
That was film.
Yeah,
I mean,
a
maybe
big
not
difference.
1,000, but a lot. So, I mean, all we did was take pictures or think about pictures or try things and try ideas. And there's a letter that Francessca writes up there where she says, I would be so proud of her because she put her camera down and was drawing. And she was drawing pies. And the good thing about drawing pies, she did 10 paintings of pies, is that you can eat them afterwards. And, but, that's what we did was take pictures. And I think, you're right, it wasn't digital, so we had to process all this stuff. And we did not really have good systems for storing it or saving it or preserving it or anything else. And the amount of work that she produced, is we haven't even seen a lot of it. It's really amazing.
There's debate around that. There's debate around how much is still withheld or not. But we can talk about that another time. Other questions from the audience?
You're in the mid-'70s. This is a very interesting time period when star twins were coming to rise. They were in school. They were ripping, taping, tearing, that sort of... and there's a whole plethora of people in Denver. We have an incredible artist named Wes Kennedy that also was doing staged fantasy work, cutting things up, scratching things. And I'm just seeing if you are finding in that rise in that time period of that exploration, because earlier in photography, art school didn't really exist pre-'70s for fine art photography. It was documentarian, you become a photojournalist, but art school did not. This is this early exploration age. So Maybe you'll get into it this weekend.
Well, I would encourage everyone who's interested in that to read Drew Sawyer's essay in the catalog, because that's exactly what he talks about, is kind of the context of contemporary art and at the time when she was making these works, and also what it meant to be in art school as a photographer pursuing these ideas, because that was a pretty fresh new thing. We kind of take it for granted now that, conceptual photography even, and just photography as a fine art medium. But that was not the case, certainly, 40 years ago.
I don't think that, the way I would respond to that, I guess, is that Harry Callahan and Aaron Siskin were the heads of the department when we started. So it was pretty much straight photography. And I just think of Francessca, again, I could be wrong on this, but I think that she was more inspired by other mediums than photography. I don't know that she was, in fact, looking at that much photography.
I think that's a pretty accurate statement. I mean, she also grew up, for those who might not know, her family had a house in Italy, and they would go there every summer, and they would travel all over Italy and the rest of Europe. And so she had this, every year, she even, I think, did second grade or something in Italy, because they lived there for the whole year. She had this, kind of education within the discipline of like Western art history that I'm pretty sure no one else who was at RISD with you had experienced. And so so much of the work that you see upstairs is playing into like very traditional cliches from painting of like the nude female in the landscape and available for the male gaze. And of course she's like chafing against some of that, but she's also experimenting with it and kind of taking it on in a really ambitious way. And that only comes from having really absorbed what that tradition is, to be able to work against it.
Right.
Let's see.
And I believe it was conscious.
Oh, yes,
Totally.
I'm sure. Yes.
Now, at the end of this discussion, what is not captured in a photograph that you remember about your relationship and friendship? Those spaces, a laugh, or something that's not in the image.
There's certain friendships that you have that are hard. They are mercurial, people can do things that really hurt your feelings, and they're still worth it. And you can't have that many friendships like that. You can have a couple, maybe one, maybe two. But I was very aware of my friendship with Francessca that this was one of those. Like, she did things that were really hurtful. And she also did things that were just, you would never dreamt like that before. She kind of like invited me into her dreams in a way. And so I think that's hard. However, what is here is that, and what frustrated me through the years was, she was silly, and we had fun. I mean, there was one day that she decided she was going to get a real apartment, and we go and rent this apartment, and we take her mattress up there, and she walks around and she goes, "I can't do this," and then she throws the mattress out the third-story window, and I'm there taking pictures. But for me, the things that weren't in the narrative that was out in the world are in these pictures and in the show.
Thanks, Keely. There was a question over here.
Yes. I got a strong sense that like your environment and the environment that she was in this room really helped you guys and her get in this sort of state of mind to do this creating. Do you think she would have found creating a space more difficult in this kind of modern age with all this technology and social media? As an artist, this is a space like that. Do you think she would have ran into challenges, or do you think she was that type of personality, she still would have been private, even in this sort of very public technology?
I don't know that she would, right? But that's an interesting idea. I think of what we're doing now in the name of sharing is a complete distraction almost all the time. Like, it's so rare that I would find a picture that moves me like one of Francesca's on my Instagram feed. And if I found it there, it would not resonate in the way. And furthermore, I think that what makes the pictures resonate even more is getting a sense of her process and who she was as a person and the spirit of, and kind of being able to feel that texture. Photographs at their best are not just to be seen. They're meant to be felt and smelled and heard and scratched at maybe. And I think that what happens now, where we're viewing every single thing in our life on this piece of two-dimensional glass, is really unfortunate. And when you go to an exhibit like this, I don't think it's a throwback. I think it's a door open into, like, oh, this object is really special, and look how it bent, and look at the words on the back, and look at the postmark, and look at the French fry wrapper, like all of these things that we would completely ignore. If we did the French fry wrapper today, we take a picture and share it, and you'd never like get a sense of this old greasy thing. And you know, I get everything going on. I worked for Instagram. I was an artist in residence there. I'm doing all this stuff, but when I come here and have the experience here, it just stops me in my tracks. And I'm looking at this work, at this show, as both a participant in its evolution and as a visitor, kind of, because I just get to come in today and visit. And I just think that experiences like this, the same with live theater, the same with seeing a movie in a real theater, the same with having a conversation eye to eye. It's just it's so powerful, and it's so important. And institutions that allow us to do that, and culture that allows us to do that, and relationships that allow us to do that is really important. And this show is about like feelings and experiences that happen in the real world, and they're shown through materials that exist in the real world, not just.
Even though you have like a big Instagram following and you totally care about them. Okay, do we have any final questions? Oh, wow, we have a lot. Okay, in the red sweater.
Paula.
With Francesca, did you notice like any sadness or a sense that maybe she was suffering on the inside? Or did she kind of not seem like she was dealing with those emotional kind of heavy issues?
I think we were all dealing with things that we probably couldn't put a finger on what they were. Like, there were a lot of feelings going on that we wouldn't say, I'm depressed, but you probably look back now and say, wow, I was really depressed, or that was really hard. But at the time, it's just something that you're doing and trying to work through, and you're going to keep working through it. You're not going to give up. I mean, the one thing about being in school is you really didn't have the freedom to give up unless you left school. Like, you had to stick with it. And all these feelings we have now, it's just like, oh, I'm feeling really depressed, or I'm feeling, and not to deny those feelings, and not that they aren't real, but again, good work, if good work has to be a stew of all those feelings. And it's like, I used to scream a lot when I was in the dark room. When I moved to New York, I would just like let out a scream, and I thought the clients hired me because I cared enough about the work to scream. Like, I cared that much. You know, was I depressed? Was I frustrated? Maybe all those things, but you know, that was just part of the process. And I think that when Francesca was doing this work, I would hope, and I'm speculating here, but I would hope that when she was doing it, she was in her, maybe not happy place, but she was in her zone, where she made magical things happen when she set up her camera. And I'm sure that that gave her her version of pleasure.
Yes, question.
So I went through art school also. We went through this process. One class, we had to define what a great art is. And there were 20 different answers to 20 different people. I'm curious if you had to do the same thing at Misty, and on the second follow-up.
So the first, just repeat the
What
question.
is great art?
Oh, if we would think about what great art was at RISD, I think it probably changed every week. I don't know. I mean, I think that the idea of great art out in the world is one thing, and I actually didn't talk about this with Francesca, but I'm sure she has a lot of feelings about who the great artists were. For me, great art was this, and great art was that. When she was in my bedroom, Sloane's reading a book, and like I just find like the most mundane things every day high art for me. And so I would go to art history class, and he was talking about all these artists, but the guy teaching it and being in that room with those students, for me, was the art. And being with Francesca was the art. It wasn't what she was creating. It was being together.
The follow-up was, how is she a great artist?
How is Francesca a great artist?
Yes.
When I went to art school, I didn't know the answer to that. I didn't know what it meant to be an artist. I had never met an artist. And when I met Francesca, I had a much better definition of what that meant. There are just certain people, I feel like we're all amazing, but we all are amazing in different ways, and there are certain people who can get to that place that can communicate feelings powerfully with other people and let us go to our own places. Like, again, what I was so happy about at the opening is people were going to their own places via what was on the wall and what was in the cases. And I just think that's a gift. And the other part of it is it's very hard to be an artist. I mean, Francesca left tragically young. Other people suffer through financial problems and recognition and feeling appreciated and all kinds of things. And I think that when you take a person who's really gone there and doing this kind of work, they are fragile. Francesca was, like, to me, so fragile. And all I wanted to do was make sure that she had a tuna fish sandwich, to make sure that she had a shower, to make sure that she had someone that she knew if she called on me, I would be there. And not that I was that close with her necessarily or was the closest person in my life, but I think that when you're around people who are fragile, those of us that have skills that are good in other places, like that you can help support those kinds of things, that there's a great gift that the people who are fragile, the artists, the great artists, can give to those of us who can function better in the real world.
If we have one more question, we can do it, but that was such a great note to end on. Yes, final question back there.
How do you think her work or her process would be different if she was working with digital photography?
Francesca was not, like, the equipment that she used was crap. She had a crappy twin lens camera. She had a crappy rental 4x5 that you would take out from the photo cage there. And like, she was not working with a fine, lens or a fine
And that's
materials
it's
at
an
all.
important point to make, because she was able to create like kind of radically beautiful and enigmatic work without a lot of bells and whistles.
Totally. Like, there were no filters. There were no, there's nothing fancy going on here at all. And there's no going back. Like, when you open up Photoshop, you can kind of go and recreate something that didn't exist when you took it just by the tools that you have now. Or if you want to take 1,000 pictures, it really doesn't matter because, You don't have to process the film and make the prints and do all that stuff. It's just a completely different process. So this was a very tactile process with not very good equipment.
Well, if George talked earlier about how he was a participant in some of the work upstairs and is now a visitor to the exhibition, but tomorrow he will be a tour guide of that exhibition as well. And I encourage you all to come back if you're able tomorrow to hear his musings on the exhibition, and I'm sure being in front of certain photographs will trigger some additional stories and anecdotes. But for now, I want to thank you all so much for being here. Thank you for your questions. And George, thank you so much for sharing everything with us. We're so grateful.
Thanks, Nora.